Hello. Hi, Derrick.
Hi, how are you?
So I'm Mark Shapiro, music director of two choruses that have commissioned the composer Derrick Skye. The two choruses are Cantori, New York, and the Cecilia Chorus of New York. We will be doing joint premieres of two versions of a piece called Neither Separated Nor Undone. Cantori will perform in November, and Cecilia Chorus of New York in April. We found Derrick kind of on the internet a number of years ago, and it's been an absolutely fantastic collaboration. So pleased to welcome you, Derrick. And let's start by, can you tell us a bit about your background as a musician?
Yes. So my background as a musician is very much rooted in my family's musical practice. So I have family members that played in church a lot, on organ, on piano, singing in the choir, these kinds of things. And so as a kid, I wanted to take part because that's what I saw everybody else was doing.
And where was this?
This was in Fresno, California. So like in the Central Valley of California, and then also Palmdale and also Los Angeles. So I have family in like Southern California and the Central Valley at the time. Although everyone has since moved kind of to the LA County area. So we're all kind of in the same county now. But prior to that, that's kind of where this happened. So there you go.
And so your musical language is so distinctive. Before I say more about it, how would you say that it came to be what it is?
Yeah, so I was very, very interested in the dialect, a dialect of music that incorporates the vocabulary of many different musical approaches. I've always been interested in that, mainly because I've always also been fascinated with language. Like when people would speak, English, but then English might be their second language, and they'll mix the two together, and like the way that their accents come out is all very artistic to me. And so I really wanted my music to not that I wanted my music, I just like that sound. So so like it just kind of, that was the sound that I knew that I like to hear in music. And like any other composer, for me, I went on a listening rampage to try and find, because I assumed that somebody else had this kind of approach. And so I would go out and just listen, try and find things. And I would find close little snippets and like cues for soundtracks, but by and far, I just had to make it myself in order to get what I was looking for. And so that's kind of how I fell into composition. I remember when I was a kid taking, back when there were tapes, when I was a kid, taking two different boom boxes and playing two different styles of music that were in the same key, just so I can hear them merge together. So when I got older and had the opportunity to be a composer, these were the things that I was just like, that's what I want to do. I want my language of music to be something that has like a dialect of music that's a combination of different dialects of music, just all kind of folded into one.
When I listen to your music, it has such an extraordinary quality of naturalness. And I have wondered if that's, I don't think composing is easy, but there is something that I wondered if you would consider your musical voice hard won, or you just always knew who you were.
Oh, well, I don't know. I guess there's a couple of ways to approach that question. One is that I play everything. when I'm writing a piece. I have some equipment at my house that has like some samples of violins and violas and stuff, and with a breath controller. And so I will play everything that they would be playing. I will be playing it on the piano with the breath controller, kind of giving it sustain and dynamics and all of these things. And then with the singing, I, as you heard on some of the examples, I'm also singing all the parts because I want it to feel natural. I want it to feel like communal and very, human to the core. And I feel like that's, if that's where I find joy in music is when it feels like it fits in the body naturally. And so I can't help but hope that that others might feel the same way when they interact with my music.
I think we do. I can say that. Something that you just said that is interesting, because you kind of tossed it off, was that's where you find joy.
Yeah.
And joy is so much part of your sound and so much part of every encounter we've had. When you talk about it, you sound like everybody's joyful, aren't they?
Oh, that's true. Well, if everybody was joyful, the world wouldn't be the way it is, right? So, yeah.
So what is it that makes you so joyful, Derrick?
Well, I mean, to be honest, I'm in a field of writing contemporary classical music. In my upbringing in contemporary classical music, or whatever kind of genre we can call it, which is also a whole nother discussion, right? But when I was going to UCLA and when I was going to Cal Arts, a lot of the music around me that was considered new and contemporary classical did not sound joyful. It was very abstract, which isn't a problem. But for me, I like to live my life with contrast. So, and there were some pieces that I would hear when I was younger where I would probably rather just go sit on the freeway in traffic, because I would feel the same way. So if I really wanted that feeling, might as well I could do it anywhere. Why go to the concert hall and pay to do it when I could just get it for free by being upset on the freeway or something like that. And so one of my things is out of just the when life can be difficult, then you search for things that can make you joyful. And there were some difficult things that I had to deal with in my life. And so when I was writing music, I was going to use that music to counterweight and provide that contrast for me in my life. And then also when I was going through my studies, I would assume, and in many cases, it would turn out to be correct, that the majority of a concert program would not be that way if it was a full new music concert. And so I would say, well, I'm just going to provide the counterweight to the programming decision that whoever made the programming, and then I will just do this joyful sounding piece, or this kind of uplifting or consonant sounding piece, because I know that it might be the only one on there that's like that. And so, so I'm just gonna go the other way. But then, that's also like a curation, me kind of also dipping into the mind of the concert curator a little bit. So, but so there's a few reasons why my music sounds joyful.
So I think it's an unusual quality, actually, and I think it's really a quality in the positive sense of that word. I have two follow-up questions that come to mind immediately. So one is, when you're describing the work that you did and the contexts you did it in, did you experience pushback? Did people ever try to make you do something else? Or were you encouraged to express yourself the way you wanted to?
Yeah. So I for a time, so in other words, well, not in other words, but when if somebody were to approach me and say, we're going to pay you to do a piece, but it needs to sound like this, like Merce Cunningham, John Cage collaboration or something like that. I know what that is. It doesn't really take me that long to do it. So I'm just going to go and do it because that's the gig. Right.
Mm-hmm.
But if I have a choice, then I'm not going to do that. And one of the reasons why is because I want my family to be able to enjoy my music. And there were countless examples of concerts that I would invite them to that had, some very cerebral, abstract stuff going on. And they were just like, we're out. So if the concert's going to be like that, you can just send us the recording of your piece and we'll check that out. And I was like, well that's that's going to, the family won't even listen to it. So I was just like, you know what? And then I don't need it. Like, I don't need that sound to dominate my life. Now, that doesn't mean that I don't like it. I like it when it's contrasted with other pieces that aren't that. But if it's a whole, if it's I'm not going to put it on in the car while I'm driving to, anywhere really. So in that respect, when I started doing music like that, yeah, I got some pushback. People didn't think it was serious. They usually they'll say, "Oh, that sounds like film music," even though it doesn't fit with any film because it covers up dialogue and is too distracting. So they usually try and say that when they don't know where to put it. Yeah. So oh, well, that's a film thing or something.
And did that pushback discourage you at all, or not even for a second?
No, because I thought that there were several film scores and film cues that to me were running circles around some new classical works that I was listening to. So I was just like, well, I don't know, there are some film scores that could challenge any contemporary classical work with some of those cues in there. Especially in the late 90s, some really, really good scores. Yeah, I mean,
you want to mention in particular?
Oh, like Elliot Goldenthal's like Alien 3, that the film is terrible, but the score was fantastic. There's this Jerry Goldsmith's The Ghost in the Darkness. That was a really, really good soundtrack. There's a lot of really cool stuff in there. All the John Williams, master orchestrator, beautiful, beautiful pieces. And I get that pushback, but then I just, it doesn't matter to me because at the end of the day, if you're a composer that doesn't like listening to your own music, then what are you doing? Why? Why are you right? And so if they can't put that on in the car for listening, then why would they expect somebody else to want to listen to it too? So I don't know. It's hard to do. Yeah. So that's what I would do. And that's what I continue to do.
So it seems, and I think you and I have talked about it, there are a lot of influences in your musical language from a lot of sources. Can you speak to any of those?
Yeah. So the music that I really love it's the musical systems that I love to use in my music come from three like dominant sources, and then there's like multiple sources that you can kind of tie into that, because when I think about music theory, I think about music theory of the entire world. I don't think about Western music theory. I think about, well, what's the theory for everybody? And so, and the only way to conceptualize what the theory of approaching music practice for all of humanity is to constantly be looking for ways that different musical practices overlap. It's just constant. And so so for me, the biggest, the big triad for me is Persian classical music, Indian classical music, and West African music. That's
Mhm.
those are the big three for me. And then from those three, I am always looking for, because those three do overlap. Sometimes people are like, well, do they overlap? And how do those things well, they overlap a lot. And so when I find those overlaps, sometimes those overlaps end up being like the core or an essence of a style of music from another culture. And just by the flow of music history, some people may have went up there with some of these musical practices, and then a new musical practice was born by the combination of various practices. Um, the Persian classical music, the Indian classical music, and the Western classical music are very much kind of part of my musical systems that I like to draw from.
And can you
And
speak a bit even more in depth about what aspects are you talking about? Pitch,
rhythm,
harmony, rhythm?
right. Yeah, absolutely. So rhythmically, West African music and just African music in general, um, there's what speaks to me the most are the ways that polyrhythms are used.
Mm-hmm. Explain for us what a polyrhythm is.
Oh, so a polyrhythm is actually kind of two rhythms that sound like one's going at a different speed than the other, but they're both going at the same speed. They're just one is like, well, I guess they could be considered going at different speeds. That one's going faster than the other. So I'm gonna snap a polyrhythm for us. So that polyrhythm right there is 2/3, and this is like a quintessential like backbone of a lot of West African music, and that combination. There's so many countless amounts of things that can be stacked on top of this combination, depending on which patterns are feeling this more or this more, right? So there's a lot of influence in my music from that system, from West African music. And I can also say that there are many cultures that use that kind of polyrhythm in their music. It's just the system that I resonate with the most is from Ghana, from West Africa. And so that rhythm, you can have that rhythm in some rhythms in Persian classical music. There are rhythms in Persian classical music that that have that same ra tikati ra tikati ra tikati ra tikati ra tikati. There's systems like called musical rhythmic system called a kedeshme that actually has like this kind of three feel going on in it, and those two things, that's like a bridge between two musical practices. And then with Indian classical music has the same kinds of polyrhythmic things that happen in that, except a lot of their rhythms will become very language based, where it really does sound like the percussion and the melodic instruments are speaking over the tempo, which is, to me, just it's one of the most marvelous things, because then you get this level of complexity, as it relates to like the underlying tempo. That's just it just makes you want to cry sometimes. It's so exciting. It's really, really beautiful. So you've got those kind of three things that are circulating. And I will say, see, now I'm getting into it. So I will say that also the speaking nature of the musical systems from Indian classical music also translate back to West African music and Persian classical music, because you'll have melodic lines in Persian classical music that are played by different instruments where it really sounds like there's a beautiful amount of ornamentation, and it really sounds like the instruments are speaking over the beat, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then in West African music, you'll have like a lead drummer or a dancer or a singer, and it really sounds like they are performing over the beat, but there's like, it's unquantifiable flows happening. And you can take that and you can connect it to, you know, music from America, hip hop, jazz, all of these things where like there's a stable cycle on the bottom, and then people are, you know, flowing over the top of these things with just an infinite amount of complexity, and it's just super fascinating. So like you have all of these connections, and it's just, you know, without going super technical, but there's all of these wonderful connections between these musical practices and these musical systems that, like, that's what I love. I'm you know, I want to do music theory for the planet rather than just Western classical, because we're all here, you know. So let's find those connections.
So our time is going, but I have a couple more things I want to ask you. One is a sort of follow up to this, because one of the questions I often ask myself is, what is it about polyrhythm that is just so fun to listen to? And you know, listening to you talk, I think there's something about just a feeling of decoration of time and space. That is, there is something very beautiful about the nature of this decoration. Does that sound right?
Yeah. Well, and I also think one of the things I've asked this question to myself and my wife and I, Kim, we talk about this often, of how like our relationship to the things that we listen to or the things that we watch have a lot to do with the way that our bodies are. And so our bodies just live in, like, we are a living polyrhythm. The heart is going at one speed, doing one rhythm, while your lungs are doing something else. And then if you're walking, then you've got your legs and your arms doing another rhythm while your heart's doing another. So it's very like, it's very embodying and natural to have a polyrhythm happen in music, because we are literally biological polyrhythms. And so, and then the universe works that way too. There's a cyclical nature to the universe, and then things are going at different speeds and different rates. And, you know, if you go into physics, you'll see that, you know, the way that things resonate, the way that atoms resonate can actually be the biggest difference between something that's like solid or a gas or a liquid or something like this. So, and you have all these different rates happening at all the same time. And, you know, it's very natural, I think, to love polyrhythms, because that's what we are.
I love that. There's two more things I think we should talk about that are a little more focused on this particular project. So
absolutely.
This is the piece that I mentioned, the title, Neither Separated Nor Undone. There were two things I wanted to ask you to speak to. One is, this is part of a series of pieces that you have written and I think are still writing. That was one. And then the other is the text. Tell us about the text.
Yeah, so the text is actually like full of like these kind of, this idea of contradictions, the complexity of something being one thing and another at the same time.
And just to step in, who wrote the text?
I did.
Yeah.
I also wrote the text. Yes.
Yeah.
Sometimes I have difficulty setting other people's text to my music, because there are so many rhythmic qualities to it that I need to be able to like change words, because sometimes I will prioritize the music before the text.
Mm-hmm.
And so then that means that I need to find words that not only work as text, but also work musically in the way that I want the rhythm to like emerge for the singers. It's not a very, it can be, it can take a long time. Like what'll happen is I'll come up with like a rhythm of how I want something said, but all I'm doing is gibberish until I can figure out a word that matches that flow of rhythm. And so it may take some, and it can't just match the flow of the rhythm, but then it also has to be related to the concept, and it has to like fit with the word next to it. And so like there's a lot of parameters. So I make it hard on myself for sure. But that's par for the course, I guess.
Well, you're a hard worker. I've certainly seen that. But I think that's a very striking thing. I think it's quite unusual for composers to kind of backfit the words.
Yeah. That usually doesn't happen. It's usually, here's your text, set the music to the text. Right. And but for me, I usually go the other way. I set the text to the music. And that and I think that that's also one of the reasons why sometimes people will look at my music and they'll say, what in the hell with the rhythm? But then when they say it and then they hear me doing the recording of it, they'll say, wow, it actually feels natural for me to just say this thing in 11 beats.
Yeah.
Right. And then a lot of that is because I sat there making sure that whatever words I put with that 11 beat cycle was going to feel natural for us to say, because the reality is Mark, you and I are sitting here having this conversation and we're speaking in time signatures all the time. And it feels very natural for us to have this conversation. So it should feel that natural when, setting the text to music.
I think absolutely. And that was part of our process, was to finding not only the meters, but how to notate them.
Absolutely. In a way that makes sense. And because that's the other thing, right? Is that like, what's most comfortable for your community. I know what's most comfortable in my head, but we have to make sure that both of those things find balance, line up to each other. And that's the cool thing about music, is that it's never going to be called music fact. It's always going to be called music theory, because it's an ever shaping thing. It's this thing that you always mold to fit what you're doing at the time that you're doing it.
And I thought that something that was interesting in the work as we did it together was we found that meters like 17 and 19 and 11 were the way to go.
Yes.
That it was actually easier. Yeah.
And that it was actually easier, even though when we thinking about it, we're like, this is terrible. Like, how are we going to count this? But then when you just say the words and they come out and it's like, oh, well, that didn't feel so bad. And it happens to be in 17 beats.
Yeah.
Like, I guess it's in 17.
That's exactly. I totally agree. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then one last follow-up on something you said much earlier. And I don't want to go places you don't want to go, but you said, so that your joyfulness in music was a response to difficulties you experienced in your life. Is there anything that would be relevant to our hearing of these pieces of that biographical nature?
Yeah, actually, for sure. So for me, I've always had there were some difficulties when I was growing up with understanding how certain things could have a positive effect on society or humanity, but also have an extremely negative effect as well, and like how to navigate that. And that's also kind of through life. Like if there's when you're in a family, there might be somebody who really can be destructive, but they're still somehow are able to give you these kernels of knowledge or of experience that you wouldn't be who you were without. And the struggles that I talk about now when I was explaining a little bit about the bio kind of passively, really had a lot to do with that. Like how could a country that has enslaved people, and then but yet I'm here and I'm doing these things, I'm with you and we're making music together with the community, and I love those things, but I couldn't say that these things wouldn't have happened without what happened, which is an absolute disgrace on for humanity. And but it's simply possible for those two things to be true at the same time, or the same with religion. Like religion, I mean, that's a really long conversation about so the effect on humanity that religion has had. And yet there are these beautiful paintings that have emerged. There's this beautiful choral music that has emerged. There's all of these other things. And so but it's a struggle. The struggle is to know that both of those things can be true 100% at the same time. And that is like the kind of overarching difficulties that I've experienced in my life. And that's one of the reasons why that it kind of contributes to why I think people feel that my music is more joyful than not. It's because I'm, there's a lot of really difficult things going on right now. There's a lot of really difficult things right now, and it makes some people just want to scream, and so you can have some music for that. And then there's also, some times where people just want to know that it's okay right this second, that we're going to be okay in this moment. We're going to be okay. Now, we don't know what's going on for the next whatever, but at least when people come to see our show with this piece, in that moment, they can say, you know what, we're all right now. And that counts,
I think that's where we should stop. That's a beautiful way to close this conversation. So, Derrick, thank you so much. I'll stop the recording and then we'll wrap up.
Sounds good.